Violence intervention, or GVI, has been a buzzword in the city of Lexington over the past few months. Some advocacy groups are calling on city leaders to implement that strategy to help stop shootings.
It has even become a topic in the campaign for mayor, with the current city administration and police chief taking stands against it. But what is it? How does it work? And what does it look like on the ground? WKYT investigative reporter Garrett Wymer traveled to South Bend, Indiana to show us.
Thank you for your help and for everything you do for us.
Tacked on the wall inside his office.
And since the first day I saw you, I was like, I want to be just like you.
Pastor Kenneth Lee keeps several letters that make him smile.
He wrote this to me when he was in 4th grade. He's now going to high school. He's an honor roll student and an amazing basketball player.
But among the thank you notes,
this young lady was the one that, my very first person.
Hang even more obituaries.
I saw him on Friday, and on Saturday, somebody was mad at him and shot him.
These photos, the faces of why Pastor Lee is doing what he can to preach fewer funerals here in his hometown. South Bend, population 103,000, is in northern Indiana, just 95 miles east of Chicago. Pastor Lee grew up here. He represents the 1st District on City Council, and he also leads the local Goodwill Industries outreach efforts as part of the city's group violence intervention program.
We really are boots on the ground, community outreach workers trying to turn the tide of what violence is doing in our community.
The group violence intervention strategy comes from the National Network for Safe Communities at John Jay College in New York. GVI uses 3 prongs: community members, law enforcement, and social services in an effort to reduce violent crime.
5-10 years ago, if there was a shooting, the response would be, we're going to put a lot of police in that neighborhood. That's reactive. What we want to do is understand what the dynamics are at play so we can get out ahead of the shooting. And focus narrowly enough that we're not affecting a whole neighborhood or a whole population by doing what we're doing. We're only trying to focus on those people that are driving the violence.
Experts say they're often members of street groups, gangs, drug crews, posses, and the like. Typically 0.5% of a city's population, but consistently linked to as much as 60 to 70% of the shootings and homicides. GVI calls for direct engagement and clear communication with them. For law enforcement especially, GVI often involves a change in strategy and mindset. South Bend, Indiana first implemented GVI back in 2014 after the city dealt with a spike in homicides.
GVI brought a different approach.
At the South Bend Police Department, now Assistant Chief Dan Skibbins worked in the street crime unit when GVI was brought in.
Our philosophy was come in after the weekend, see what trouble was out there, what crimes were committed, and go after the individuals that were causing it.
Skibbins says they moved away from sweeps and saturation of areas to a much narrower strategy.
It's about identification of who's involved in these crimes.
Now starting with a call-in where law enforcement lays out the consequences for specific group members if violence continues.
To give the upfront game plan to those involved in the gang life so that they know if one of your individuals from your group drops a body by a gunfire, we're going to come after your entire group and put a stop to it.
Skibbins says it took about a year or 2 for officers to buy in, but now they've seen their arrest numbers drop outside of enforcement actions focused on groups who have not listened to the warnings. And while some years show shootings have decreased, other years are up. But he says just data about shootings and homicides doesn't tell the full story.
It's because you can't put a number on how many lives you did save, how many individuals you did get to go to social services and potentially get a job and get off the streets.
I look at these every day.
That's where the outreach arm of GVI comes in.
This reminds me of why we do what we do.
Like Pastor Kenneth Lee and the other members of Stand Against Violence Every Day, or SAVE.
We go on the scenes, we go to the hospital, we walk families through the worst time of their lives. We try to give them opportunities for individuals, not just that person, but the whole family, if they want to turn their lives around.
They offer things like peace walks, mentorship programs, conflict resolution, expungement clinics, and even free laundry days at a local laundromat.
we found out that when people don't have hope, they become dangerous.
For Pastor Lee, it can mean getting calls in the middle of the night or preaching another funeral. But it doesn't have to.
If I can prevent a kid from being one of these, or a young person from being one of these, then that's success for me. May not be thousands of people, but if I can stop one of them, that's success.
So where do things stand here in Lexington? Well, we know the city met with the National Network for Safe Communities several years ago. Now, the NNSC gave the city 6 recommendations, and city leaders say they implemented all of them except for GVI.
And Garrett, we know this is sort of tied up in the mayor's race as well, in that the challenger David Kloiber says he is for it. Mayor Gorton has opposed it. What are some of the reasons that the city leaders who are in office right now, the Gorton administration, have given for not implementing it?
Well, Mayor Linda Gorton says she has consulted with the police chief, community activists, the ACLU, NAACP, and others, and she says they all share concerns about the targeting aspect of GVI. She fears it could do serious damage between government, law enforcement, and communities of color. She also says experts have not been able to explain to them why GVI does not work in some cities. She's also made the point that Lexington has street outreach teams and offers social services to families in jeopardy. Now, you can read more about the strategy of group violence intervention, get a closer look at data, and see other cities' results, all in this story right now on WKYT.com.